guys, my name is Shmail and today we'll be doing prokaryotic cells. So in the last video I went over eukaryotic cells, so this time I'll be going over prokaryotic cells. So, we begin. So, prokaryotic cells, they're also known as prokaryotes, and they're a type of cell, biological cell, that do not have a cell nucleus or a membrane-bound organelle. So these two key points are very crucial about a prokaryotic cell that you must know. So in the exam they'll probably ask you to compare eukaryotes and prokaryotic cells, and so you need to mention that they do not have a nucleus or any membrane bound organelles. So an example of that would be mitochondria, which has a double membrane, as we looked at in the previous videos. And also examples of prokaryotic cells include bacteria. So this is a type of bacteria cell, and instead of having a nucleus, it has the DNA strand free in the cytoplasm. So let's look at the components of a prokaryotic cell. So you have a capsule. So the outer layer of prokaryotic cells is gummy or slimy, and is a covering, sometimes labeled as the slime capsule, and this helps the bacteria stay together in colonies and or provide some protection to the cell. So majority of the time it will provide protection. Also, prokaryotic cells have cell walls sometimes, and they're a rigid framework, so the kind of slightly the structure is slightly similar to the ones in plant cells. So the beta glucose, the cellulose in that is much more stronger as well, and so bacterial cell walls are quite strong as well. You also have this thing called flagellum, flagella for plural, and flagella are not limited to prokaryotic cells, and sometimes you find that eukaryotic cells also have flagella, but in bacteria cells, so as I mentioned, bacteria cells and eukaryotic cells both have a flagella, which is basically like a tail that you would find on a sperm cell, so it provides movement. So in many cases the flagellum of a prokaryotic cell is responsible for the motility, which basically means to be able to move actively and constantly while consuming ATP energy of the cell, and the flagellum of a prokaryotic cell does not beat but rotates about bearing the cell wall. So it rotates like an engine, a motor, and like a corkscrew, which is pretty accurate analogy, and a motion that drives a cell forward in much the same way as a propeller propels some ships forward. So it's like a propeller, which just spins constantly, providing movement. Or if you want to get a higher grade, you could use the word motility. So the flagellum is responsible for the motility of the cell. So prokaryotic cells also have plasmids, and plasmids are short pieces of circular DNA, and they replicate independently of the cell genome. So plasmids are not present in eukaryotic cells, and you won't find them in eukaryotic cells. So I think that plasmids just contain extra DNA. So let's look at prokaryotic cell replication. This process is done by binary fission, and fission just basically means to split, and the opposite of fission is fusion. So this is done by binary fission. Bi just means two, so it'll be splitting into two. So there's basically splitting into two, and the cell replicates, making its genetic material. So before actually splitting into two daughter cells, binary fission is a kind of asexual reproduction. So the DNA is replicated, and segregation occurs simultaneously. So as you can see in step 2, the DNA is replicated. So first it's in a tiny little scrunched up piece of ball, and then slowly it spreads out and it replicates itself. While it's replicating itself, it starts to segregate, and also you would have one copy of the DNA on one side and the other on the other side, but these little plasmids here, they are not fixed to go in certain places. They can go wherever they like, so you can have an unequal amount on either side. And so the genetic material is split equally, so the DNA strand and daughter cells are genetically identical unless a mutation occurs. So, this is the way I memorize the difference between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, and it's really important you know the differences, because to be honest with you, I don't think they're going to ask you any questions in the exam apart from the differences between prokaryotic or eukaryotic, or they probably ask you features of a eukaryotic cell or prokaryotic, but most likely the differences, so it's important you know this. So here's a mnemonic, DORA, which stands for DNA, organelles, reproduction, and average size. So when talking in about the comparison of prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, so you just write DORA on the side and then write the meaning next to it. So D for DNA, and you talk about DNA. So as you know before, that DNA is naked in prokaryotic cells, whereas eukaryotic cells, it's bound in the nucleus. And if you look at DNA in prokaryotic cells, again it's circular like the plasmids, but eukaryotic cells is linear. You can ignore this bit, usually no introns, usually has introns, you can ignore that bit, you don't need to know that for the exam. So let me just cross that out. You don't need to know that. Organelles, so when talking about organelles, you can say that it has no nucleus, whereas eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus, and prokaryotic cells have no membrane-bound organelles, whereas eukaryotic cells do have membrane-bound organelles. And the sizes of ribosomes, so prokaryotic cells have a 70S ribosomes, and eukaryotic have 80S ribosomes. And the way they reproduce is by binary fission, so prokaryotic cells reproduce via binary fission, whereas eukaryotic cells do this by mitosis or meiosis. And when talking about average size, you know that prokaryotic cells are much smaller, between 1 to 5 micrometers, and eukaryotic cells are between like 10 and 100 micrometers. So that's it for today. So I'm only going to be, that's all you need to know for prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. And so yeah, so in the next video I'll talk about viruses, which is a total different thing to prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. So if there's any problem or anything you like, please do comment down below.